The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as a teenage girl walked down Main Street, her tennis team jacket zipped up against the crisp October air. Her ponytail swayed with each step as she clutched a small envelope containing 3 months of carefully saved allowance money. The local department store's glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, welcoming her into the warmth inside. The girl had been planning this shopping trip for weeks. Her mother's birthday was coming up, and this year she wanted to give her something special. Not just another handmade card or breakfast in bed, but something that would make her mom's eyes light up. Something to say thank you for all those late nights helping with homework, all those early morning rides to tennis practice, and all those encouraging smiles during tough times. Walking past the perfume counter, she breathed in the mixed scents of various fragrances. A friendly saleswoman offered to spray some samples, but she politely declined with a smile. Her destination was the jewelry section, where she had spotted the perfect gift during her last visit. A silver locket that reminded her of the one in her mother's old photo album, the one her mom had lost during their move 5 years ago. The jewelry counter sparkled under the store lights, glass cases filled with glittering pieces that seemed to whisper stories of special moments and celebrations. An elderly couple stood nearby, the husband helping his wife try on a watch, their comfortable banter making the girl think of her own grandparents. She approached the display case slowly, scanning each shelf until she found what she was looking for. There it was, the heart-shaped silver locket with tiny flowers engraved on its surface. The price tag read $89.99, just within her budget of $95 that she'd saved from babysitting her neighbor's kids and helping organize files at her grandfather's home office. Standing there, she imagined her mother's reaction. Would she recognize how similar it was to her lost locket? Would she understand the hours of work and saving that went into this gift? The thought made her smile as she waited patiently for a sales associate to help her. The store was getting busier as the afternoon crowd filtered in. Music played softly through the speakers, some pop song about family and love that seemed fitting for the moment. She pulled out her phone to check the time, making sure she wouldn't be late for dinner. Her grandfather was making his famous pot roast tonight, and being late wasn't an option when pot roast was on the menu. As she waited, she noticed other shoppers moving around her. A young mom trying to keep track of 2 energetic toddlers, a businessman hastily picking out a tie, a group of elderly ladies discussing the merits of different scarves. The girl felt grown-up and independent, standing there with her saved money, ready to make her first major purchase. The weight of the envelope in her pocket reminded her of all the Saturday afternoons spent organizing dusty files in her grandfather's home office. He had insisted on paying her properly for her work, saying that learning the value of earned money was as important as learning to save it. When you work for something, he always said, you appreciate its true worth. She remembered how her mother had taught her to save money, helping her set up a special jar for her allowance and explaining the importance of patience. Good things come to those who plan ahead, she would say, and now, standing in front of that perfect locket, those words rang especially true. A quick glance at the envelope confirmed what she already knew: 3 20s, 3 10s, and 5 singles, plus some change. She had counted it 4 times before leaving home, not wanting any surprises at the counter. Her hand brushed against her school ID in her pocket, tucked safely next to the money. She always carried it, another habit her mom had instilled in her: always be prepared. The jewelry section had grown quieter now, most shoppers moving on to other departments. She could see her reflection in the glass case. A young girl in a navy blue tennis team jacket, hair neatly pulled back, standing tall with the posture her coach always encouraged. Everything about this moment felt right, felt earned. Little did she know that in the next few minutes, her carefully planned shopping trip would take an unexpected turn, one that would test everything her family had taught her about dignity, patience, and standing up for what's right. Just as her fingers touched the glass case to point out the locket she wanted, a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. The touch wasn't gentle, and it made her jump. "Don't move," a gruff voice commanded from behind. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to find 2 police officers towering over her, their faces stern and unyielding. A security guard stood slightly behind them, his arms crossed. Around them, other shoppers began to slow their pace, some stopping completely to watch the scene unfold. The girl's cheeks grew warm as she felt their eyes on her. The envelope of saved money suddenly felt very heavy in her pocket. "We've received a report of suspicious activity," one of the officers stated, his hand resting on his belt. "Multiple witnesses saw you concealing merchandise." The words hung in the air like thick smoke, making it hard to breathe. The girl's mind raced. She hadn't even touched anything except the display case glass. "There must be some mistake," she managed to say, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. She remembered her grandfather's words about staying calm in difficult situations. "I'm here to buy a gift for my mom. I have money saved up." Her hand moved slowly toward her pocket, but the security guard stepped forward, misinterpreting her movement. "Keep your hands where we can see them," he barked, causing nearby shoppers to flinch. A woman with a shopping cart hurriedly steered her children away from the scene. Someone's phone camera made a distinct clicking sound. People were recording now. The girl's tennis team jacket suddenly felt too warm, too tight. She wanted to unzip it, to show them she hadn't taken anything, but she didn't dare move. "The store's security cameras," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "They'll show I didn't take anything." The second officer, a younger man with a notebook, spoke up. "Security system's been having issues today." "Convenient timing, isn't it?" His pen tapped against the notepad rhythmically, like a clock counting down moments that seemed to stretch forever. More people gathered at a distance, their whispers creating a hushed soundtrack to her humiliation. A store employee who had helped her last week walked past, head down, pretending not to recognize her. The girl felt tears forming but blinked them back. She wouldn't cry. She couldn't. "I'd like to call my grandfather," she said, surprised by how clear and strong her voice sounded this time. She thought of him, probably reading his afternoon newspaper in his favorite chair, not knowing his granddaughter needed him more than ever. "Oh, you'll get your phone call," the first officer replied, his tone suggesting he'd heard similar requests 1,000 times before. "But first, we need to check your pockets and bag." The girl nodded slowly, knowing that cooperation was her best option, just as her grandfather had taught her during their many conversations about civic rights and responsibilities. As she carefully pulled out her envelope of saved money, she explained each item: 3 20s, 3 10s, 5 singles. "I saved it for 3 months." Her voice trembled slightly as she laid out her life savings on the jewelry counter. Next came her school ID, had house key on its tennis racket keychain, and a wrinkled receipt from the grocery store where she'd bought her lunch. The security guard picked up the money, counting it with suspicious eyes. "Where does a kid get this kind of money?" he asked, as if saved allowance and honest work were foreign concepts. The girl opened her mouth to explain about the babysitting, about organizing her grandfather's files, about saving every dollar she earned, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached for her phone with steady hands, despite her racing heart. She knew exactly who to call. Her grandfather, a man who had spent his life ensuring justice was served fairly, would know what to do. As she dialed his number, she could almost hear his calm, wise voice telling her stories about standing tall in the face of prejudice. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring echoed in her ears as the officers watched her every move, as strangers' phones recorded her moment of humiliation, as her dreams of surprising her mom with the perfect birthday gift crumbled around her. But she kept her head high, just like her grandfather had always taught her. "Put the phone down," the older officer commanded, but she had already heard her grandfather's reassuring hello on the other end. "Grandpa," she said quickly, her voice steady despite everything, "I'm at Carter's department store. The police are here, and they think." The officer stepped forward, but she managed to hear her grandfather's firm response: "Don't say another word. I'm on my way." The phone call ended, and an uncomfortable silence filled the space around the jewelry counter. More customers had gathered, forming a loose circle around the scene. Their whispers felt like little pinpricks against her skin. She could hear fragments of their conversations. "Just a kid. Shouldn't jump to conclusions. What's happening to our town?" The younger officer cleared his throat. "Look, if you just tell us where you put the merchandise, this can all end quickly." His tone was almost friendly now, as if they were having a casual conversation over coffee. The girl took a deep breath, remembering the breathing exercises from tennis practice that helped her stay focused during tough matches. "I haven't taken anything," she repeated, her voice clearer and stronger than before. "I've been saving money to buy my mom a birthday present. That's why I'm here." She gestured toward the locket in the display case, still sparkling under the store lights, now seeming impossibly far away. A middle-aged woman in the crowd stepped forward, her shopping bags rustling. "I've been watching her since I got here," she announced. "She's just been standing there, looking at jewelry. This is ridiculous." But the security guard waved the woman away, creating more space around the girl. The first officer pulled out a small notepad. "We have a witness who reported seeing you slip something into your jacket pocket." He flipped through the pages with exaggerated slowness. "About 20 minutes ago, near the cosmetics section." 20 minutes ago, I wasn't even in the store," the girl responded, her tennis team jacket suddenly feeling like armor. "I just got here. Check the entrance cameras." She stood straighter, channeling her grandfather's courtroom presence that she'd watched so many times from the back row of his courthouse. A store manager finally appeared, walking briskly toward them with clicking heels and a worried expression. "Officers, we may have a situation with our security footage." She spoke in hushed tones, but in the tense quiet around them, her words carried. "The timestamp on the witness report doesn't match our entrance logs." The girl felt a small surge of hope, but the security guard quickly countered. "That doesn't prove anything. The cameras have been glitching all day." He shifted his weight, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more phones appeared in the crowd, recording the scene. A young store employee who had been hovering nearby suddenly spoke up. "She comes in sometimes to look at that silver locket. I've helped her before. She's been saving up for it." The girl recognized her from previous visits, grateful for this small act of truth in a moment of confusion. The officers exchanged glances, their certainty showing the first signs of cracking. The girl used this moment to slowly unzip her jacket. "You can check all my pockets," she offered, maintaining eye contact with the older officer. "I have nothing to hide." As she stood there, being searched in front of curious strangers, she thought about her mother's birthday coming up, about the locket that was supposed to be a surprise, about her grandfather who was probably breaking every speed limit to get to her. She thought about all the times he had told her stories of justice and dignity, of standing up for what's right even when your voice shakes. The search revealed nothing, of course, just as she had said. The older officer stepped back, his face unreadable. But before he could speak, a commanding voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "I suggest you step away from my granddaughter right now." Everyone turned toward the store entrance, where a distinguished-looking man in a perfectly pressed suit stood, his presence filling the space with an authority that made even the officers straighten their postures. The girl felt tears of relief threatening to fall, but she held them back. Her grandfather had arrived, and everything was about to change. Her grandfather's voice on the phone had been the first ray of hope in what felt like an endless nightmare. Though the call lasted barely 30 seconds, those precious moments changed everything. She remembered how his voice, usually warm and gentle during their evening chats about school and tennis practice, had transformed into something she'd never heard before, steel wrapped in velvet. "Don't worry about your bridge game," she had overheard someone say in the background of her grandfather's phone. But his response was quick and clear. "Some things are more important than cards." There was a shuffling sound, then the scraping of a chair being pushed back. "My granddaughter needs me." Now, standing under the harsh store lights with all eyes still on her, those words echoed in her mind. The older officer kept glancing at his watch, while the younger one continued writing in his notepad, the scratching of his pen unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. The security guard had retreated a few steps, his earlier confidence wavering. The girl's hand still tingled from where she held the phone. She could picture her grandfather in that moment, probably wearing his favorite navy suit, the one with the subtle pinstripes that he always said reminded him of her grandmother. He would have been at the community center, sitting at the same table by the window where he played bridge every Thursday afternoon for the past decade. More customers had gathered, their shopping forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. A young mother pulled her curious child closer, whispering something in his ear. An elderly man shook his head slowly, his face a mask of disapproval, though whether at her or the situation she couldn't tell. The girl's thoughts drifted to all the times she'd visited her grandfather's courthouse, watching from the back row as he presided over cases. She'd always been amazed at how his presence could calm a room, how his voice could cut through chaos and bring order. Now, knowing he was on his way, she felt some of that same strength flowing into her. "How long do we have to wait?" the security guard asked, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The older officer checked his watch again. "Her guardian's been contacted. We wait." His tone had changed subtly since the phone call, becoming more professional, less accusatory. The girl's tennis team jacket, which had felt like a target earlier, now felt more like armor. She thought about the team motto embroidered on the back, "Strength under pressure." Her coach had chosen those words, but right now, they seemed like a message from the universe itself. Time moved strangely, somehow both crawling and racing. The store's background music seemed inappropriate now, a cheerful pop song about summer love playing, while tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Someone's phone rang in the distance, making several people jump. She thought about her grandfather's drive to the store. It was exactly 2.7 miles from the community center. She knew because they'd measured it once during one of their weekend walks. He had told her stories during that walk, stories about justice and perseverance, about standing tall when others tried to make you feel small. The young store employee who had spoken up earlier caught her eye and gave a small, encouraging smile. In that moment, the girl realized something important. Sometimes support comes from unexpected places, and courage can be contagious. She straightened her shoulders slightly, channeling every ounce of dignity her grandfather had taught her about. Through the front windows, she could see the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. A few curious passers-by had pressed their faces against the glass, drawn by the unusual number of people gathered inside. The girl focused on her breathing, just like she did before important tennis matches. In, out, in, out. The envelope of saved money still lay on the jewelry counter, her carefully counted bills a testament to weeks of work and planning. The silver locket she'd wanted to buy for her mother gleamed quietly in its display case, now seeming like it belonged to a different world, a different story. Then suddenly, a familiar car pulled into a parking spot right in front of the store. Even from a distance, she could see her grandfather's silver hair catching the sunlight as he stepped out, his movements deliberate and purposeful. The moment she'd been waiting for had arrived, and with it, the promise of justice. The automatic doors slid open, and her grandfather stepped into the store. The air itself seemed to change. He wasn't a tall man, but he carried himself with such quiet authority that he appeared to fill the entire entrance. His perfectly pressed suit, polished shoes, and the distinguished gray of his hair commanded attention without asking for it. The crowd parted naturally as he walked through, like waves breaking before a ship's bow. Each step was measured, deliberate, echoing slightly on the polished floor. The girl noticed how some of the older customers recognized him, their expressions shifting from curiosity to understanding. After all, he had served as a judge in this community for over 4 decades. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the space. It was the same voice that had presided over countless cases, the same tone that had made even the most stubborn attorneys pause and reconsider their arguments. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding involving my granddaughter." The older officer straightened his posture unconsciously. The younger one closed his notepad, tucking his pen away. The security guard took another step back, suddenly finding the floor tiles incredibly interesting. The grandfather's eyes took in everything. The scattered crowd with their phones, the money still laid out on the jewelry counter, his granddaughter's composed but tense stance. "Sir," the older officer began, but the grandfather raised his hand slightly, a simple gesture that somehow commanded complete attention. "Before you continue," he said, removing his glasses and cleaning them carefully with a handkerchief, "I'd like to know the specific probable cause for detaining a minor without contacting her guardian immediately." He replaced his glasses, looking at each officer in turn. "And I'd be particularly interested in hearing about any evidence supporting this detention." The store manager stepped forward, her heels no longer clicking with the same confidence. "There was a report," she started, but her voice trailed off as the grandfather turned his attention to her. "A report," he repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the weight of the words. "And this report was verified through security footage, I assume?" His tone made it clear this wasn't really a question, it was a gentle reminder of proper procedure. The girl watched as her grandfather moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of his aftershave, the same brand he used for as long as she could remember. His presence felt like a shield, not just protecting her, but radiating a calm certainty that truth would prevail. The security cameras, the younger officer offered, they've been having technical issues today. Even he seemed to realize how weak this sounded as the words left his mouth. How unfortunate, the grandfather responded, though his tone suggested this was anything but unexpected. So we have an unverified report, no evidence, and a minor detained without proper procedure. He placed his briefcase on the jewelry counter, the soft thud emphasizing his words. Would anyone care to explain why my granddaughter's civil rights seem to have been considered optional today? The crowd had grown quieter, hanging on every word. Some were still recording, but now their phones seemed focused on capturing something different, not a scandal, but a lesson in dignity and justice unfolding before them. The girl noticed a subtle change in her grandfather's expression as he glanced at the silver locket still displayed in the case, the birthday gift she'd been saving for. His eyes softened for just a moment before returning to their previous determined focus. He understood, without her saying a word, exactly what had brought her here today. Perhaps, he continued, his voice taking on the tone she'd heard him use in courthouse corridors when teaching young law clerks, this would be a good opportunity to review proper procedure. He opened his briefcase slowly, deliberately. But first, I believe someone owes my granddaughter an apology. The store's background music had stopped, as if even the building itself was holding its breath. In that moment of silence, standing next to her grandfather, the girl felt something shift in the air. A change that went beyond just her situation. This wasn't just about a mistaken accusation anymore, it was about something much bigger. Her grandfather placed 5 items on the jewelry counter: her school ID, the envelope of saved money, her tennis team schedule, a bank withdrawal slip, and a small notebook filled with careful calculations of her savings. Each item made a soft sound as it touched the glass, like pieces of evidence being presented to a jury. "Let's examine the facts," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years on the bench. He picked up the school ID first, holding it where everyone could see. Honor roll student, captain of the junior varsity tennis team. He glanced at the officers. Hardly the profile of someone attempting petty theft. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, his earlier certainty crumbling under the weight of simple facts. The security guard had retreated even further, now standing near a rack of scarves, as if hoping to blend into the merchandise. Her grandfather opened the small notebook next. 3 months of careful savings, he continued, turning pages covered with neat columns of numbers. Babysitting for the Hendersons on Oak Street. Filing documents at my office. Allowance money earned through household chores. Each entry told its own story of honest work and patient saving. The store manager leaned forward, peering at the notebook. "But the witness said," she began, but her grandfather held up a polite hand. "About that witness," he said, his tone remaining measured but firm. "I believe we should discuss the nature of that report." He turned to the officers. Was the witness asked to provide any specific details about what they claimed to have seen? Or was an assumption made based on, he paused meaningfully, other factors? The older officer's face reddened slightly. The girl watched as her grandfather's words hit their mark, gentle but precise, like a surgeon's scalpel cutting away falsehood to reveal truth. A small commotion near the store entrance drew everyone's attention. The tech team had finally arrived to fix the security cameras. "Sir," one of them called out, "we've restored the backup footage from the last hour." The grandfather smiled slightly, not a smile of triumph, but one of quiet satisfaction. "Perhaps we should review that footage together," he suggested. It wasn't really a suggestion. The store manager quickly nodded, leading the way to a small office behind the jewelry counter. The security footage played on a monitor, showing the girl entering the store just 20 minutes before the accusation. Frame by frame, it showed her walking directly to the jewelry section, standing patiently, looking at the locket. "Not exactly a master criminal at work," her grandfather commented softly, his words carrying just enough edge to make several people wince. He then pulled out his own phone, showing a series of text messages between himself and his granddaughter from the past few weeks. Messages about saving money, about wanting to buy something special for her mom's birthday, about working extra hours filing papers to reach her goal. My daughter, her mother, lost a similar locket 5 years ago during our move, he explained, his voice softening with memory. My granddaughter has been planning this surprise for months. The footage continued playing, showing nothing but a young girl doing exactly what she'd said she was doing, trying to buy a birthday gift for her mother. The security guard's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. The officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about rushing to judgment. Her grandfather turned to address the gathered crowd, many still recording on their phones. "This is what prejudice looks like," he said quietly. "Not always loud or violent, but quiet. Insidious. Masquerading as security concerns or routine checks." His words carried no anger, only a deep sadness born of long experience. The girl stood straight beside him, feeling stronger with each passing moment. She watched as her grandfather laid out the final piece of evidence, the bank withdrawal slip from that morning, showing exactly the amount she'd saved, withdrawn to buy her mother's gift. "Now," her grandfather said, gathering the items back into his briefcase, "I believe we have several matters to address." He looked at each person in turn, the officers, the store manager, the security guard. "Starting with an apology to my granddaughter. And then, perhaps, a long overdue conversation about how we treat young people in our community." The store manager's office had emptied, leaving just the key players in this afternoon's drama. The girl sat beside her grandfather, her tennis team jacket no longer feeling like a target, but instead like a symbol of who she really was, a student, an athlete, a daughter trying to do something special for her mom. "I'd like to start," the older officer said, removing his cap and holding it in his hands, by formally apologizing. "We'd acted on an unverified complaint without proper investigation." His partner nodded in agreement, adding, "We should have asked more questions before taking action." The store manager stepped forward, placing a small velvet box on her desk. Inside was the silver locket the girl had been saving for, the one that looked so much like her mother's lost treasure. "This," the manager said softly, "is our way of apologizing. We'd like to give it to you, no charge." But her grandfather gently raised his hand. "That's very kind," he said, "but my granddaughter has worked hard to save for this gift. Taking it for free would diminish the meaning behind her efforts." He turned to look at his granddaughter with pride. Sometimes the value of a gift lies not just in the item itself, but in the dedication it represents. The girl nodded, pulling out her envelope of carefully saved money. "I'd like to buy it properly," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I've saved enough." The manager's eyes welled up with tears as she rang up the sale, handling the locket with new respect. As they completed the purchase, the security guard, who had been quietly watching, spoke up. "We're starting a new training program," he announced, "about unconscious bias and proper security protocols. Would you," he looked at the grandfather, "would you consider speaking to our staff, sharing this experience?" Her grandfather smiled, not his courtroom smile, but the warm one usually reserved for family dinners and proud moments. "I think," he said, glancing at his granddaughter, "we both would be willing to share our perspectives. Sometimes the best teaching comes from real experiences." The store had begun to return to normal. Customers browsed racks of clothes, tried on shoes, examined price tags. But something had shifted. The employees moved differently, more thoughtfully. The security cameras, now fully functional, seemed to watch over a space that had learned an important lesson. Near the jewelry counter, a young family paused, their daughter pointing at some sparkling earrings. The security guard, who would have usually watched with suspicion, instead smiled and asked if they needed help. Small changes, but meaningful ones. The girl carefully placed her purchased locket in her pocket, right next to her phone with its cracked screen protector, a reminder of everyday life continuing alongside extraordinary moments. Her grandfather gathered his briefcase, nodding respectfully to the officers who had shifted from accusers to allies in the span of an afternoon. As they walked toward the exit, other customers smiled at them, not with pity, but with understanding and respect. The young store employee who had spoken up earlier waved goodbye, a small act of truth-telling having played its own important role in the day's events. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The girl could see her reflection in the store windows. She stood straighter now, stronger. Her grandfather had taught her many lessons over the years, but today's lesson about dignity and justice had been the most powerful yet. "You know," her grandfather said as they reached his car, "your mother's birthday isn't for another week. How about we stop for ice cream, and you can tell me all about how you picked out that particular locket?" His eyes twinkled with the same warmth that had helped guide their community toward justice for over 40 years. The girl smiled, feeling the weight of the velvet box in her pocket. Today hadn't gone as planned, but somehow it had become something more important than just a shopping trip. It had become a moment of change, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. As they drove away, she caught one last glimpse of the store in the side mirror. Sometimes, she realized, the best gifts aren't the ones we plan to give, but the lessons we accidentally teach along the way. 2 months had passed since that day at the department store. The girl sat in her school's newspaper office, putting the finishing touches on her latest article. The computer screen glowed with words that had taken her weeks to write, each sentence carefully crafted to share her experience without anger, but with hope for change. The school paper had never received so many responses to an article. Students stopped her in the hallways to talk about it. Teachers used it in their social studies classes to discuss civil rights and community responsibility. Even the local newspaper had picked up the story, spreading its message beyond the school walls. At the store, things had changed too. Her grandfather had kept his promise to help with their training program. Every Tuesday afternoon, after his bridge game, he spoke to different groups of employees about justice, dignity, and the importance of looking beyond first impressions. Sometimes she joined him, sharing her side of the story, watching understanding dawn in the eyes of those who listened. The security guard had become one of their strongest supporters. He completely revamped the store's security protocols, ensuring that every complaint now required proper verification before action could be taken. "We're not just protecting merchandise anymore," he would tell his team. "We're protecting people's dignity too." Her mother wore the silver locket every day. She'd cried when she opened it on her birthday, not just because it looked like her lost one, but because she knew the whole story behind it now. How her daughter had stood tall in the face of injustice, how a simple shopping trip had turned into something much more meaningful. The young store employee who had spoken up that day had been promoted to assistant manager. She'd made it her mission to create a more welcoming environment for all customers. The jewelry counter, where everything had started, now had a small sign reading, "Everyone's welcome to browse. Just ask if you need help." One afternoon, the girl returned to the store with her grandfather. Not to shop this time, but to meet with a group of high school students who wanted to learn about creating positive change in their community. They gathered in the same spot where she had once stood accused, but now it felt different. Now it was a place of learning. Real change, her grandfather told the students, starts with small moments of courage. Sometimes it's speaking up when you see something wrong. Sometimes it's standing firm when others try to push you down. The students nodded, taking notes, asking questions. They wanted to know how they could make a difference too. The store manager had kept her word about making changes. Security cameras now worked properly all the time, protecting everyone, both customers and staff. But more importantly, there was a new atmosphere in the store. Employees had been trained to greet everyone with the same warm welcome, to offer help based on what customers asked for, not what they assumed they could afford. The woman who had made the false complaint never returned to the store. But others like her might have learned something from what happened that day. The local news had covered the story, not as a scandal, but as an example of how communities can learn and grow from their mistakes. At home, the girl kept the notebook where she'd recorded her savings. But now it had a new purpose. On its last page, she'd written something her grandfather had said on their drive home that day. Sometimes the best way to fight injustice is to meet it with dignity and to turn it into a lesson that others can learn from. As she walked through the school hallways, she noticed small changes. Students from different backgrounds talked more openly with each other. The principal had started a monthly forum where students could discuss their experiences and concerns. Real conversations were happening, difficult sometimes, but necessary. Her tennis team had even adopted a new motto, inspired by her experience: stand tall, play fair. It wasn't just about sports anymore. It was about life, about treating everyone with respect, about standing up for what's right. And sometimes, when she passed by the department store on her way to practice, she'd see her grandfather there, still sharing their story, still working to make sure that what happened to her wouldn't happen to anyone else. That's how real change happens, she realized, one story, one person, one moment of understanding at a time.